Hi, everybody. My name is Ewan Webster. I'm the president and CEO of Thesis Gold. I'm just going to walk you through the presentation here on our advanced development stage Lawyers Ranch asset in north central British Columbia and Canada. We are in the historic Toodoggone mining district, and this area was very active in the 70s, 80s, and our asset was actually producing high-grade underground gold, silver, deposit back in the late 80s and closed in 92 just with depressed gold prices. But as a result of it being an operational project, there's fantastic infrastructure in place in this part of British Columbia. And after it shut in 1992, it's basically sat dormant for the next 20 years. And we acquired it in 2018. And over the last 7 years, we've grown the land position to just under 500 square kilometers, so district scale land position. We've taken the resource from about 100,000 gold equivalent ounces through to 4.7 million ounces, 4 million of which is measured and indicated, and just over 1.5 grams gold equivalent. So really strong grades. Also of note is that we have 84 million ounces of measured and indicated of silver. So about a quarter of the value of the project is actually in silver. And interestingly, to give you a sense of the scale, if we were to go into production today, we would be the largest silver producer in Canada and the 5th largest in North America. So it's significant credit here. And then just late last year in September, we put out a new PEA on the project with some incredible economics and a very strong production profile. And we get into that in the coming slides. We also have signed agreements with all of our partner nations in the area, strong proponents of the project. And very recently, we announced a new strategic investment by Centerra Gold for 9.9% in Thesis. So really glad to have them on board as a shareholder. Logistically and synergy-wise, I think it makes a lot of sense, which I'll demonstrate in the coming slides. So in terms of access, I'm here today in Vancouver, and that's where I live, but you can drive north to these northern cities in British Columbia. Here's Prince George, and from Prince George, you can drive up to the project site here, which is this inset map on the left-hand side. And in driving that road, you pass through Centerra Gold's Kemess mine and onto our land position here at the end of the road. We've actually reactivated some of these roads over the past few years. We put in 6 new bridges. They're all rated to 70 plus tons, so they're future-proof for any mining scenario. There's an airstrip just to the south of us here, and there's a power line tie-in at Centerra's Kemess mine. So for those of you who are not familiar with this project, it was a large copper porphyry deposit. It produced about 3 million ounces of gold and 750 million pounds of copper. And there's still a huge resource there as well. But more importantly, it's fully permitted mine, camp, tailings capacity, and there's a lot of synergies to explore there for us in the district. And as well as Centerra's deep expertise in the region certainly helps. In terms of just a quick corporate snapshot, we've got about 237 million shares outstanding. The market cap's hovering around 220 million Canadian, and we've about 35 million in the treasury, 24 million of which came from Centerra just last week. And the project is very clean. I mean, we've got no debt. There's no stream on it. There's a 0.5% NSR on the Lawyers project, which is the guts of the 4.7 million. About 4 million of that is on the Lawyers project. And that was sold by the vendor to Royal Gold probably about 3 years ago now for $8 million. And then there's a 2% NSR on the Ranch project. We have strong analyst coverage. The latest group to launch on us was Haywood in December. They have about a $3 price target at the moment. And given that we're trading just around 90 cents, they obviously see the potential here for significant re-rate and growth in the coming months. Our shareholder base is made up probably of about 70% strong institutional support. Equinox Partners is our biggest shareholder, and then Franklin Templeton, ASA Merck, Waratah, and a strong list of long-only institutional funds, in addition to most recently, as I said, Centerra Gold for 9.9. This graphic here on the left-hand side is just to illustrate how we've grown the resource over the past 7 years. In 2018, when we acquired the project, it was about 130,000 gold equivalent ounces. And you can see that very steady growth with measured and indicated ounces in gold and then inferred ounces in silver. But, as of May last year, we're just over 4.7 million ounces. And I think you would agree that there's a very clear trajectory here for more ounces in the coming years. And I think I can very clearly point to that upside on the project. The grade, as I mentioned, about 1.5 grams gold equivalent, which for what is predominantly an open pit project is very, very strong. This slide, just a nice summary of the PEA that we put out in September last year. You can see the highlights here in the gold and commodity prices that we used, 1930 and 24 silver, which are a long, long way away from where they currently are. But at the time, that was a 3-year trailing average, and we wanted to allow the project to speak for itself. Even with these conservative numbers, that generated an after-tax NPV of 1.3 billion, 35% IRR with a 2-year payback. And if we use something like $3,000 gold, $30 silver, I think the numbers are more like 2.9 billion, 65% IRR, and less than a year payback. So, at spot prices, the numbers are just phenomenal. And really, this is all driven by about 3 million mineable ounces for a strong 14-year mine life, where we're producing 215,000 ounces gold equivalent a year at about 1.6 grams head grade. The 215,000 ounces as well breaks down to about 165,000 ounces of gold and then 4 million ounces of silver. So that's that nice silver kicker coming in. And the capex here at 600 million, and it's Canadian, very reasonable. I think we've got a pretty good handle on that as well, and I don't see that running away from us substantially. So great project economics and very strong production profile with the opportunity to improve as well. Logistically, this project is also just very simple. We went through the infrastructure benefits of this part of British Columbia, and one of the other nice aspects of it is that we're a few hundred kilometers inland from the coast, and as a result of that, we don't have the rugged topography of coastal British Columbia. We don't have any glaciers. We don't get 10 meters of snow a year. We have, as you can see from the imagery here, we have basically subalpine to alpine plateaus with broad rolling valleys. And I think during the winter in camp this year, we had about 45 centimeters of snow on the ground. So logistically, just very straightforward in terms of from an operational standpoint. And then this is the general site layout where this is focused on the Lawyers project. As I mentioned earlier, that's the guts of the deposit. That's, 4 million of the 4.7. And it's predominantly made up of 3 main deposits. So we have AGB, Cliff Creek, and Duke's Ridge. And these are just conceptual pits with the measured and indicated block model within. Centralized milling facility right here between the pits on this just nice big broad plateau. Waste rock on the far side. Tailings will just be pumped around into this nice big broad valley. So small footprint, operationally, again, just very straightforward. And this is the road here that heads off to the Ranch deposit to the north. And it's about 25 kilometers away, but from those deposits, it's flat to downhill the whole way. So from a trucking standpoint, gravity's working with us. Okay, so where do we go from here? So on the back of that PEA that came out in September last year, one of the nice aspects of it was that of the 3 million mineable ounces, 90% of that was measured and indicated. So we didn't have to go back in and do a big infill drill program. We didn't have to raise a whole bunch of capital to do a 100,000 meter infill program. We rolled straight into the PFS. Which began in December, and it's being led by Ausenco and Mining Plus. We were looking for a globally recognized brand with deep expertise that could potentially take this project through to construction, and they've been fantastic so far. We've gone through a cold eyes review of the PEA, and there were no red flags raised. So this very much on track for completion in Q4 of this year. In addition to that, we're also looking at commencing permitting this year, and that's going to commence in probably about September-ish time. And we'll be working closely with our partner nations on that. In addition, the government has come out recently and announced that they're looking to, recognizing that Canada is a resource-based country. There's a lot of opportunity here that we've been dragging our feet on, and they're looking to expedite resource-based projects and other large infrastructure projects through the permitting process. So we're firing on all cylinders here to make sure that we stick to an aggressive timeline and move this project forward quickly through the permitting process. In addition to that, we are also about to announce, and probably in the coming weeks, what our program is going to look like for this year. But I think it's going to be pretty significant drill program. I would describe it as discovery focused, so predominantly on the Ranch project to the north, where at the moment there's 700,000 ounces at about 2 grams, but it's looking at expanding, not necessarily expanding the resource, but testing a range of new targets on that project in the high-grade gold system near surface, but also drilling some deeper holes and testing the porphyry potential at Ranch. So 3 big kind of major catalysts coming this year for the company. So I think 2025 is going to be another transformative year for Thesis Gold. In terms of entering the permitting process and advancing the asset, I mean, a lot of the heavy lifting here on the project is complete now. We've essentially completed all of the baseline work on the Lawyers project at Ranch. It'll be predominantly complete by the middle of this year as well, which is hugely capital intensive. It's nice to have that behind us. No major red flags raised either in the baseline data collection, which is fantastic. All of the on-site engineering, geotech, metallurgy, infrastructure work is completed through PFS as well. Taking a little bit more of a closer look now at the Ranch project. So that's this asset here to the north. So it's a contiguous land position, but essentially 2 projects. And right now you can see it's made up of a number of different deposits. And I think that's really a reflection of the amount of drilling that's been done. As we continue to do more work here, I think you'll see those continue to grow, potentially coalesce in a larger system. But more importantly, I think we've really just scratched the surface on the Ranch project. It's a 40 square kilometer high sulfidation, structurally controlled epithermal system that we've really just tested a fraction of. Thinking about the district in general now, it's getting a lot of attention. I mean, for the longest time, I've been talking about how much opportunity exists in the Toodoggone, and it's very similar to the Golden Triangle to the west of us, where they've seen billions and billions of dollars of exploration spent, and they've made some phenomenal discoveries. We have the same rocks, the same ages of mineralization, the same styles of mineralization, but seen a fraction of that exploration spend. And I think that historically the perception was these are small, higher grade deposits that really don't have the legs to build out into multi-million ounce deposits. I think we've demonstrated that's not the case over the last 7 years. But more importantly, it's Freeport has been working in the area for a little while now as well, and they recently announced with AMARC a new porphyry discovery here, right at surface, never been drilled before. High-grade gold copper system, phenomenal discovery. So great to see that, great to see attention coming to the district. But more importantly, from our perspective, on our Ranch project here, as I said, huge alteration system. There's no way to generate that high sulfidation system without an underlying porphyry driving it all. So it gives us a bit more conviction to drill some deeper holes to test that kind of blue sky. Now, why I think Thesis is a good investment, and why invest in Thesis? I mean, it ticks a lot of boxes, and fantastic tier 1 jurisdiction, district scale land position, brownfield development site. The infrastructure is all in place. We've got a large high grade resource. that's got a lot of room for growth, a lot of silver exposure there as well. The project economics and production profile are excellent and will continue to get better, I think, during this kind of bull run in commodity prices. We've got strong First Nation support on the project as well, and it's nice to have Centerra come in and beyond the capital injection, give the project a stamp of approval, having gone through a very substantial due diligence process. And, they're a very logical partner for us as well, given their deep expertise in the region. And we also have the opportunity to explore the infrastructure that they currently have there. So I think, and as I mentioned, the catalysts that we've got coming up for this year, I think will be transformative again for Thesis Gold. We have a strong team behind this as well. And, this is just a fraction of the team on the screen here. There's a lot of other people behind the scenes that we rely on. But I won't run through everybody's bio, but, there's strong industry professionals with decades worth of experience that certainly complement mine. And then, social license in Canada and British Columbia is just so important. And I think I'm very proud of the work that we've been doing. And, we've been working very closely with our partner nations over the last 6 years, and continuous engagement. They actually helped us design the baseline program and execute that. They take care of all the infrastructure upgrades, heavy equipment operation, and provide a lot of personnel for the project as well. So great partnerships. I think you're going to continue to see that grow and strengthen over the coming years as well. And with that, thank you very much.
Your career, first of all. So how, sort of leading up to Thesis, tell us a bit more about yourself. Who are you? What have you been up to in your career?
So I'm if you can't tell, I'm from Scotland originally. I have a first class honours degree from the University of Glasgow and in geology. And then I had grand aspirations of becoming a professor and pursuing research. I moved to Canada to pursue a PhD at the University of Calgary. I think I was the only hard rock person, there for some time. But it became pretty clear pretty quickly that, being a professor probably wasn't for me. But I really enjoyed my research, the PhD. I finished that up. And then I actually ended up in, even though I didn't want to be a professor, I ended up in Whitehorse in the Yukon. Teaching for a year, covering a maternity leave position, but it was a very kind of hands-on program, focused around the mining industry. And on the back of that, I moved on to basically working as a consultant for in both technical and corporate roles through a number of different companies in North and South America, in Peru, Chile, Nevada, Ontario, BC, and a different number of different deposit types as well, and commodities, mostly precious metals, but looking at copper as well. And then in 2018, ended up getting involved in the projects that we currently have under Thesis Gold. And in 2020, I became the CEO. Late 2020, I think I became the CEO of Thesis Gold. And I've been in that position ever since, and taken it through the merger with Benchmark Metals, and been instrumental, I would say, in the recent success of that merger, of the new updated global resource across both projects, of the very strong PEA that we put out last year, and ultimately directing the vision here going forward through 2025 and on.
And sort of from leaving consulting, more or less, to spotting this thing, you want to get involved hands-on, and that was some years ago now. How do you think things have played out? Ewan, who saw the opportunity originally, and you now, if you just reflect on that, it would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think while working in consulting, I definitely had the vision of being the CEO one day of one of these companies, and that's ultimately where I wanted to get to. very much only interested in working on good assets and good jurisdictions with projects that really had the legs to go somewhere. And the opportunity came up with Thesis Gold to join almost as the company was essentially formed to take on that role. And it's been coming from a technical background, it's been initially it was a pretty steep learning curve, but it's been a really great, enjoyable process going through that over the last 5 years, and it's been amazing opportunity to be working on a world-class asset that has grown from 100,000 ounces through to a PEA basically, and we're working on the PFS at the moment, and I think it's very much shaping up to be what I thought the potential it had. So that's really rewarding.
And so far, I mean, you're capitalized now at like 250 million CAD, or just below that, or pretty close to 250 million CAD. Correct.
Yeah, I think today we're about 225 million Canadian.
Yeah, and what if you just outline sort of the team, the skill sets within Thesis? If we just sort of look at that a bit more closely, I mean, obviously you're an experienced geologist. You have, and we're gonna talk to Evan a bit later as well. He's also a very experienced geologist who knows his stuff. But what other skill sets do you guys have within the company?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty diverse group, and I've glossed over that in the presentation there because I figured we'd probably get into it on this discussion. But I'd say for a long time we relied on consultants to help us, and now I think we have enough critical mass that it makes sense to really start building out our own Thesis Gold management team. And bring a lot of these expertise in-house. And, two of the latest additions this year, you mentioned Evan. So Evan Orovan is our chief geologist. He's a world-renowned epithermal and porphyry specialist that joined the team in February. And he's currently developing the exploration program for the summer. But I think you're going to have a bit of a chat with him as well. So I'll let him kind of run through his bio. Katina Cordero joined us January this year as well, and I mean as VP IR, and she's been fantastic. She has a great, probably 15 plus year track record of working for mostly producers, mid-tiers and majors in the precious metal space, and she's been a phenomenal addition to the team. And then on the capital market side of things, Nick Stajahar, he spent 15 years on Bay Street, and he brings a kind of a wealth of knowledge on that from that side of things. Eric Pierce is our environment manager, and he's spent about 25 years with government, I think, working in this sector. We've relied on him heavily over the last year. He was kind of one of our first kind of growth in-house hires, and he spends a lot of time in the field in the summer, liaising with all the different arms that are operating, and he's been kind of instrumental in streamlining that whole process. And then Sean Major, our CFO, he's got about 25 years of experience on a number of different continents, different commodity types, different projects, and kind of seen it all. And I'd say what you're going to continue to see the team grow at the executive level. What we're trying to do is bring in people that understand both sides of the equation, both technical and financial. And I think near term, probably a VP sustainability permitting as we embark on the EIA process this year, and also looking to kind of bolster and strengthen our in-house engineering team as well. Then in terms of the board, we've basically refreshed the board post merger with Benchmark Metals to the south, and a lot of strong industry professionals on the board. Bill Lytle, who is our non-executive chairman, he joined us about a year ago now, and he's currently the COO at B2 Gold, and he's been with them for 25 years. I think he's up in the building the Goose project in Nunavut at the moment, I think this is his 9th mine build, and he's been instrumental in their success. This is the first company he's joined outside of B2. He went through a pretty long due diligence process as well before joining us, and he's really been a fantastic addition, helping us bridge the gap between exploration and development, and kind of trying to avoid a lot of the pitfalls that most juniors go through as they make that transition. Lisa Peterson is our audit committee chair, and she's got a wealth of experience as well, working for, started out I think at KPMG, then moved on at Barrick for a number of years, and she's currently the CFO at First Mining. So, fantastic addition recently as well. Thomas Mumford, he is a geologist. He's the VPX at Scotty Gold. And, he keeps our geology side of things in check. Very strong technical expertise. Jodie Shimkus is a government veteran. She spent about 30 years at the government, I think, on all aspects of permitting, First Nations engagement, and, is going to be instrumental, I think, as we get to this next stage of the project and go through the permitting process. And then myself and Nick are also non-independents on the board as well. So, extensive governance, mining, M&A experience, and, I think the board and the management team is also supported by a number of kind of top tier consultant groups as well. I mean, in town, we use 180 Consulting, we use Fuse Advisors. The PFS has been led by Asenco and Mining Plus. So, it's a broad, diverse group.
Yeah, I mean, it's good when you see companies getting to this size, solidifying, and not just being a hope and a prayer that someone comes and acquires them at some point in time. So you sort of have that passive threat that you'll bring this thing forward and do so skillfully. So that's good. In terms of alignment with shareholders, I always like to ask, just personally of yourself and generally the key management personnel, how much do they own in total together, and how much do you own personally of the equity?
Yeah, no, good question. So I own about 650,000 shares. I bought all of those shares. I mean, I didn't get any seed stock or anything like that. So, I purchased that, and I periodically buy some stock on the market as well. And then I have a number of options in the company as well. But I mean, I'd say for myself, I'm extremely aligned with shareholders. And I mean, most of my net worth is tied up in Thesis. I get paid by Thesis. So, very motivated to make sure that this is a success and keeps going in the right direction. In addition, Nick Stajahar, he owns about a couple of million shares, I think, as well as options. And then the rest of as we just talked about, I mean, the team is relatively new to the company, and the board has been refreshed. So, these individuals have not really had a big opportunity yet to, build up their position. We're working on that and some strategies to do that. But I think everybody that's joined the team and is on the board is very committed to this, and it's a very engaged board and team. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, we're probably between the board management team and close friends, associates, insiders, probably about 3%.
Okay. And in terms of the, you did mention the shareholder structure, right? Like 80% is closely held, to my understanding. You have 70% institutional, and that's not including Centerra. Is that correct?
It's correct.
80%.
Yeah.
So it's a tight shareholder structure. And for people who don't really know Centerra, could you just sort of characterize high level? I mean, what's the size of this company? What do they produce? Why you say they have a rich expertise, in the region that you're working in, but just give some more detail on it. Expand upon who they are.
Sure. I mean, Centerra is a mid-tier gold producer. The market cap's about 2 billion Canadian, and they're typically gold, copper, and they have a moly asset as well that they're advancing at the moment. It's not in production at the moment, but they're moving it forward. But in terms of the synergies with ourselves and British Columbia, they have Mount Milligan, which is about 270 kilometers to the south of us. And it's a producing gold, copper, porphyry deposit. And they've been working on that for years. But more importantly, to the southeast of us is the Kames project, and this is a very timely discussion because just this morning, let me back up a little bit. I ran through it in the presentation, but it is a copper porphyry deposit. It went into care and maintenance in 2012, but there's a large resource still there, and Centerra has been looking at this for the last couple of years now and evaluating it and moving it forward. And this morning, they put out a new resource update on the project. So there's about, inferred and indicated resource of about 5 million ounces of gold and about 1.8 billion pounds of copper. So, phenomenal resource still there. And they're looking at completing a PEA on the project by the end of the year and ultimately putting it back into production through an open pit and both underground long hole stoping on the higher grade panels. So fantastic to see that this morning. But importantly for us, there's that infrastructure in the region, and having them been working on porphyry deposits in the region, their deep expertise, both kind of technically, operationally wise, it's a very logical partner for us.
Yeah, and I mean, so you're seeing them actively drilling that deposit and advancing it, and obviously they're expressing their interest in this part of BC as well by making the equity investments, which obviously didn't happen. It's not just happenstance that they're doing that.
No, exactly. They just doubled the size of their exploration program this year on Kames as well, I think, on the back of this positive news. And, for us, it's great. I mean, I guess one of the I wouldn't say knocks on the projects, but one of the questions I often got in interviews, on paper, this project looks fantastic. Why is there no strategic investment? And Centerra went through a very long due diligence process on the asset itself, but then also the company, and it's nice to have that stamp of approval now from them. But yeah, they're very much moving forward in British Columbia.
Yeah, and we'll get back a bit more on this topic a bit later in our discussion here, but. If we just talk about the local stakeholders, and some of our followers have followed Skina and some of the other sort of developers getting through this process now and really re-rating the company and doing so successfully. Can you just talk about the relationship with the First Nations that you have to deal with, and these First Nations experience or sort of experience with participating in mining and minerals projects? If you just
No, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think Skina's done an excellent job moving the SE Creek forward. Fantastic project. I think we're probably a couple of years behind them. So yeah, as you talked about, they've gone through that significant re-rate. I think we have that opportunity in the coming years as well as we continue to de-risk the asset. But one thing that, and I mentioned this in the presentation, I'm very proud of, is that we prioritized early and an ongoing engagement with the First Nations and local stakeholders. And the project sits within the traditional territories of the Tahltan, which is the same as Skina, but also Takla, Quadacha, and Sekideni. And we've worked really hard to build trust through basically just transparent communication, ongoing communication, shared planning. And as I said, I think we've awarded tens of millions of dollars in contracts to First Nations owned and operated companies, where it gives them the opportunity to benefit from the growth and the success of the project as well. And I think back to the part about open communication and shared planning, it's we've had them involved in designing the baseline program, and then actually Saskatchewan and Chucho Environmental, two First Nations owned companies, actually executed those baseline programs for us, and all the infrastructure upgrades, heavy equipment operation, a lot of members working on site every year. So I'd say very strong relationship there that we've been working on over the last 6 or 7 years. Great partners on this project, and I think you're going to see that relationship continue to strengthen over the coming years.
And I mean, have most of these nations been involved with mining projects before?
Yeah, I think all of them have. I mean, obviously, Kemes is right there. So the TAC Liquid Action and Seki have kind of all been involved in that, and Mount Milligan, and then Taltan has been involved in a whole host of different projects to the west of us.
Yeah.
So they all very much understand the process and the opportunity that exists.
Copy that. So in terms of the financial position now, I mean, you haven't released, I don't know when the latest quarterly was, but could you just give an indication of what the cash will be at? You just closed this financing by Centerra, right? So you would be at, I'd assume, just about 30 million Canadian, or 32, 33, somewhere around there.
Pretty close, I think, yeah. Just maybe a little bit more, maybe a 34, 35 million in that ballpark. So, with a strong cash position at the moment. Great to have that injection from Centerra. That was a 5-day VWAP with a 10% premium as well. So that transaction closed at $1.03. So very pleased with how that worked out. But yeah, we're sitting on a very strong position.
And you haven't released your exploration program now. You alluded to that being sort of in the cards in the next coming weeks. But if you sort of give a high level view on what the 2025 expenditure would look like, if you just sort of showcase, exploration, development, all these activities, PFS, most of that is probably paid for by now, but just outline the budget.
Yeah, so, as you said, we've not announced this. It's not completely decided on yet, but I'd say somewhere in the kind of $25 to $30 million range is probably the budget for the remainder of this year. And that covers a lot of things. I mean, this, as we've talked about, we're not just an exploration company. This is a development project, and we're wrapping up all of the baseline work. The PFS is underway. Permitting is launching this year, and those are all pretty significant costs that we're committed to for 2025. And in that budget for the remainder of the year is probably about 11 to 12 million. And then on top of that, the remainder is really just exploration. And as we talked about earlier, it's going to be discovery focused. Most of it will be at Ranch, and really split between two objectives. One, and predominantly testing the high grade gold targets right at surface, and then two, poke some deeper holes and test the porphyry potential as well. We're going to do some early geophysics, some early IP to look deep and see if there's any large anomalies there. And that'll help guide our deeper drilling later in the summer. And then in addition to that, we'll probably do a bit of drilling at Lawyers as well, just to get a bit of a jump start on the feasibility work and the detailed engineering, more so around drilling some holes to understand the underground component from a geotechnical standpoint. But also those will be multi-purpose holes where we'll be collecting metallurgical data as well. And also they'll be working at expanding the mineralization. So kind of multi-purpose. But all of that combined, a lot of news flow, a lot of great potential to unlock and leverage the upside that still exists on the project, but at the same time continuing to move the asset forward and de-risk it as we move towards a construction decision.
So you're saying 12 million in development related activities, more or less, and then you would have equivalent or a little bit more, mainly drilling. And if you just extrapolate, could you just tell us now, I mean, basically what would the average drill cost be? It depends on depth and so on. If you do deep holes, more expensive on average per meter. But if you use a rough outline for the budget, so we can get an indication, a sneak peek, to the real announcement in a couple of weeks.
It's quite difficult to answer this. In fact, you'd probably ask me this, but so like on Lawyers, for example, I mean, it's predominantly just like a skid rig, and that drilling, you're maybe $500 a meter. Once everything's up and operational, and it's just pretty simple. And that's for all like NQ drilling. For the deeper holes, the geotechnical drilling, that's all PQ holes, and the multi-purpose of the network. That's slower, but you get a lot more information out of them. That drilling is probably more like $1,000 a meter, and then at Ranch, it's a bit of a mix between skid rig and there'll be some heli supported drilling this year as well. I think where we're just looking at parachute in to a new target. So to avoid kind of disturbance and pushing in new roads, we'll just parachute in, build a pad, test that target, and then with success, then we can push in a road. So somewhere at Ranch, somewhere between kind of 500 again if it's just a skid rig, and probably closer to 1,000 if it's heli supported. But interestingly, I mean, when I first started working on this project in 2018, to give you a sense of how much inflation and rising costs have affected this, it was $220-ish a meter Canadian, and so it's risen substantially. I mean, so it's, from my perspective, it's really nice to have all of that work. Most of the drilling behind us now on the project, and really the drilling we're doing is pretty minimal to advance it through engineering studies, and then anything we do on top of that is all exploration focused, and we can scale up or down that program depending on market conditions.
But the vast majority of the capital spent on exploration will be Ranch. I mean, basically, you're going to do.
Yeah.
If you're saying that you're going to spend like 15 million CAD on exploration, it sounds like, you'll do at least 20,000 meters, it sounds like, across the season. Would be fair to assume.
It'll be probably about that, yeah. Maybe like 15 to 20. Yeah.
15 to 20, okay. If you're doing some deeper holes too, that makes sense. So that's going to be interesting to see. If we use them, we'll get back to a bit more on this in a little bit here. In terms of your sort of the maintenance cost for the company, if you don't expend on exploration, let's say you would just halt development activities as well, just as a sort of financial exercise to gauge the fitness of the company, sort of passive spend wise. What does that look like? The current G&A holding cost, structure.
It's about $3.5 million a year, and that includes all of our marketing budget. So that's about $1 million a year. So we run pretty lean, but I don't ever see us in that position. I think that right now we're obviously focused on aggressive value creation, and we've got the capital to fund it. But probably about $3.5 million, with $1 million of that being for marketing.
Yeah, so 200,000 Canadian per month if you count marketing out more or less. So that's good for very, very good for a company of your size for sure. So that screens very well. You mentioned the Analyst target price from Haywood. I think they launched at 3 CAD. Could you just give an indication of the average sort of target between the analyst communities that's tracking the company, and how they're doing that? Are they assigning a value simply on Lawyer's Ranch? Or are they also looking at expansion potential, or how are they approaching their valuation at this point in time in their projection?
It's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. And I'd say the average price is probably, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's probably about $220, $230. And with $3 being the upper end, I think both Hannam and Partners and Haywood are around $3, maybe just over for Hannam, and average being about $225. And then it's really I'd say most of them are based on what is currently in the ground.
So and they're usually sort of hands tied to do that. But from your point of view, what are they missing, or what are they not allowed to price in that you think you'll be able to get them in line with in the coming 12 months?
I think you mentioned Skeena. They're a couple of years ahead of us. We've got some big milestones this year: beginning permitting, or completing the PFS. I think those two things alone will help really de-risk the project further. I think they're going to be very positive for us. I think that's going to, reduce that valuation gap. But I think one thing that goes overlooked on the asset is, we've got 4.7 million ounces, and there's so much upside that still remains here. I mean, from just the gold silver system at surface, expanding that, but also the potential porphyry system at depth. So it's kind of leveraging that upside and testing those targets and demonstrating and being able to point to where we go after the 14-year mine life is up. Because for me, I think this is a 20+ year mine in the long run, and the district itself looks phenomenal at this point, I think, and it's just been overlooked for so long, but it's really starting to get more traction.
That's a good segue. We'll just get into the meat and potatoes of the conversation. We'll let Evan lead the way and just showcase what the Lawyers Ranch looks like currently, and some of the sort of near-term gold growth ideas that you'll test this year and that you can see going forward.
Okay, so we got a bit of a introduction with Ewan, and now we're here with Evan, who's the chief geologist at Thesis. And before we sort of dig into Lawyers Ranch and take a look at what the deposits look like and the near expansionary potential and so on, why don't you tell a bit about your career and how you got involved with Thesis?
Okay, so I did my undergrad in Canada at Carleton, and my summer work when I was working there was at the BC Geological Survey. So I cut my teeth in regional geological mapping, especially with a slant of mineral potential assessment along with that. And as soon as I graduated, I switched into industry. And so I was working for Strata Copper Canada, exploring for porphyry under deep cover within central British Columbia. I did that for about a year and then decided that I wanted to do a PhD. And so through my connections at the BC Survey with Mitch Mahalanek, he strongly recommended going to Codes at the University of Tasmania. So I applied, and there was a project I was interested in looking at the Porphyry district, the Namosi Porphyry district in Fiji. And so that's what my PhD was on. It was sponsored by Newcrest at the time, and my external supervisor was Anthony Harris, who's now the chief geoscientist for Newmont. And David Cook was my primary supervisor. As soon as I completed my thesis, I was hired as the Australian Research Council's fellow in ore deposit footprints. And so I worked at Codes for 5 years looking at high sulfidation epithermal deposits embedded in lithocaps all around the world. Also other magmatic hydrothermal systems, especially as it relates to vectoring and fertility studies. There I also did a lot of teaching, so taught first year through masters and had a variety of PhD students working on projects around the world, and then decided to try my hand at government. So I moved back to Canada and worked as a mineral potential geoscientist for the BC Geological Survey. What attracted me to that position was the emergence of AI and big data sets, and I sort of wanted to understand what was going on in that sphere, especially with a math background that I had, and sort of was interested to see what we could do in that direction, and in BC, where I did cut my teeth in geology. And so I did the method development for the mineral potential modeling in BC. We did VMS, porphyry epithermal, and magmatic nickel. And then I moved on to the senior economic geologist at the BCGS and started a project on critical mineral systems in BC. Built a team where we were looking at different mineral systems across BC from a critical minerals perspective. So a little bit in deportment, as well as understanding which critical minerals occur in which deposits, especially as both by and co-products. And that's what brought me to Thesis, actually, was one of the projects that I flagged as a great project to use for the study was actually the Ranch and Lawyers project, especially that juxtaposition of both high and low sulfidation epithermal was a great place to look. I went on site and was very impressed with the infrastructure as well as the size and types of deposits, nearby porphyry deposits at Kemess. And it was absolutely beautiful there. And the team, was really careful with how they approached social and environmental matters. And it didn't take me long to make the switch to chief geologist for a thesis. And that's where I'm at today. And I just started a few months ago. So I'm still trying to get caught up with all of the details here as quickly as I can. Thanks.
All right, so I mean that's a good sort of very interesting career you've had, and you decided to jump on this as you worked in BC, sort of presumably looking fairly regionally, reviewing many projects and understanding the geology very well on a high sort of level. So what particularly, if you speak to it, this particular location where you recently have some fancy porphyry discoveries and so on as well getting attraction, what did you see here besides the main deposits, obviously?
Right. Well, there's a lot of prospects and ore zones in the area, especially at Ranch. There's up to 20 of them. And so I saw a massive potential for exploration here, as well as Ranch is a lithocap. And, I spent 5 years researching lithocaps. And so sort of wanted to test if what I learned in an academic setting could be applied in these real world situations. And so, Ranch and Lawyers together, it's like 50,000 hectares of property to explore. So it's actually quite a large area, a lot of prospects, and a lithocap that it wasn't well understood at what level these deposits were embedded into the lithocap. So was it shallow or was it deep? And so to me, trying to figure that out was something that interested me to see if we could test, if it was shallow enough that we could test into the porphyry environment, which really drew me here. And also, it's only 45 kilometers north of the Kemess mine. And so the access was really great to be able to it was really easy to get so far out into the wilderness and looking at this type of deposits. That's really what brought me here, was not necessarily that Lawyers is 4 million ounces gold equivalent, so it's this nice jewel that's sitting there, but it was actually the exploration potential within the lithocap was what attracted me the most.
And that's even beyond from what is already there, right? And we will get back a bit further down in the conversation to all of the other sort of emerging targets and what the implications of this potential is. But if we just start with as you put it, the dual Lawyers and Ranch, and just look at these two deposits, so people can understand what they look like, in which directions they are open, and what sort of near-term potential as you're moving into development now, and you'll do some drilling to expand the resource and prove a bit more scale, but what sort of potential do we see in that respect?
Sure. So I'm going to, this is just, to highlight the topography. This is the Ranch setting here. Down here is Lawyers, and these are just Molly anomalies. And I'll come back to this a little later, but if you bear with me, I'd like to switch to the leapfrog model so I could demonstrate. So this is a leapfrog model showing both the Ranch property and the Lawyers property. I guess they're combined, but you can see they could be considered separately, especially because they're distinct. They're hosting distinct mineralization styles. So at the Lawyers property, we're mostly focused on low sulfidation epithermal, and in the Ranch property, it's mostly high sulfidation epithermal. But there is potential real potential for porphyry actually in both areas. But as you mentioned, right now, let's focus in on the lawyer's property. And so just what I have showing here is gold contours, just so you could see in soils. And so these are all the gold contours in soils. You see a lot of the drilling coincides with these, the gold contours. So the lead singing deposits at lawyers are AGB, which is here, Duke's Ridge and Phoenix, which is here, and Cliffs Creek, which is here. There's another well-defined prospect down here, which is Marmot, and everything really nicely coincides with those gold contours. And as you can tell, there's a smattering of untested contours surrounding the lawyer's property. And I'm just going to zoom in on, we'll focus on the chief deposit here at Lawyers. So Lawyers is several deposits. It's not just one, it's several different ore zones. And so when we say Lawyers, we sort of mean all of this. And what I have showing here as well are, I'm not sure if it's actually showing up very well, but these are the pit outlines. So you can see it's red in the middle and blue on the outside. These are some pit designs, and these are the MSO defined stopes. And so this is sort of where the ore sits. So what you're seeing, open pit shells, these were optimized based on economics and geotech. And below that, these are those MSO shapes defining what the underground potential is. You can see that the ore bodies are steeply dipping. They consist of both veins and breccias of low sulfidation epithermal flavor. They average about 6 to 11 meters thick. And so while they're 6 to 11 meters thick, they do run along strike for over 1 kilometer in some areas, and in other areas up to 500 meters. So it's actually a substantially sized ore body. One thing to note here at Lawyers or at Cliffs Creek is there's actually really great opportunity to expand at depth and laterally in a few areas. So one of the things we're going to work on this summer is sink a couple drill holes and test that vertical continuity.
And Evan, how deep is that approximately?
So this is like 600 meters it gets down to. And so, it's getting down into below the open pit and extending for a few hundred meters as far as we know so far, but we can test that to deeper levels.
And what sort of grades are you seeing, or are you seeing to depth? Is it transitioning to higher grade, or are you getting any sort of vectoring like this going on?
That's a great question. There is vertical continuity in terms of grade, but it kind of cuts in and out. And so in some areas, we're actually getting like really high grade down at depths, and that's what's extending this stope down here, even though you don't see like a drill hole here controlling it. It's because the grade was so good. And so this is a priority area to see if we can extend it further.
So the drilling there, I mean, for the year then, that will be, it sounds like a few holes, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or something like that, to just poke in and see.
Exactly. We need to test how far this goes, but it's not a major priority for us, as like this is already sitting 4 million ounces of gold equivalents. But it is worth testing these areas and seeing how far we can push the mineralization. And we are encouraged because there is this really incredible vertical continuity that you can see, and it's untested beneath that.
And what sort of step outs? So will you try to be fairly close to existing drill holes, or will you try to be a bit more bold to showcase scale?
That's a good question. Not too bold. We want to test, maybe 50 to a maximum 100 meters away, which we're currently planning those holes right now. And so I would be able to better update you next week on what that looks like. But that's the plan as it sits right now.
Yeah. So I mean, if they were to be successful, obviously they wouldn't be. You wouldn't really be able to convert it into a resource before you move forward with the project. It would more sort of stretch out and showcase potential to add a few 100,000 ounces or something like this. Really, is what it would equate to.
Yeah,
Or could
that's right.
you be more
We,
significant?
we wouldn't be able to include that in the upcoming PFS study. So those numbers are already crunching. So it would be something for thinking about further work. And we have the FS coming up after the PFS, and so there's a lot of chance to update the calculations in the future.
Okay.
Yeah, so really great vertical continuity. We're going to test that at depth, and it's obvious from what I've shown here that the plan is to start with open pit mining here. So to prioritize early ounces. As we get deeper underground, though, the plan is to switch to long hole retreat stoping, which fits perfectly with the steep dips and the competent rock mass actually that we have down here. And so these MSO bodies that you can see are generated to reflect realistic stope shapes. So this will help guide the economics for the underground. So it is this transition from open pit, this hybrid open pit to underground mining within the mine plan. Same thing goes for AGB, which sits over here.
But basically, I mean, to summarize, at Lawyers, it's a fairly well, the existing ore bodies are fairly well constrained. They are open to depth basically, mainly. So you won't find any sort of low hanging fruit expansion currently.
Yeah, all the low hanging fruit is picked here, I would say, but there is the extending those ore chutes the best we can. So you can see there's in many places it's not completely cut off, so there is lateral extensions possible and extensions at depth.
But if we take the sort of the zoomed out view again and look at these golden soil anomalies that are, I would say definitely, obviously near mine. If you find another pit there, it can easily be brought into the mine life within a year if you drill aggressively. So could you talk about these golden soil anomalies? I mean, basically, how do they stack up to the existing golden soil anomalies that have proven, millions of ounces of gold? And how do you sort of hierarchize them? What other information are you looking at to qualify which should be drilled in order here at Lawyers?
Right. So there isn't a plan to do any regional exploration at the Lawyers property this summer. So we won't be testing these other anomalies, but it is encouraging that they do exist and align so well with the current known resource. And so, once a mine plan is finished being established, there can be there's really great potential for near mine exploration once activities get going. And so we've done, I think, a pretty good job of delineating these potential prospects or added ore zones to add on to Lawyers. And gold isn't the only element that's relevant here. So the gold is great in the soils for delineating these low sulfidation epithermal ore zones, as you can see. But another element of interest is tellurium. And so you can see tellurium, this type of anomaly is more associated with porphyry potential as well. So we do actually have porphyry potential at Lawyers just to the east in this area called Silver Pond, and it lights up really well with the tellurium anomalies as well as moly anomaly, which I don't have shown. And some of these drill holes that we have include what looks like high sulfidation, as well as advanced argillic type alteration. And so we're really excited in the future for the potential of looking into Silver Pond as well.
Right. But in terms of the gold anomalies, I guess it's sort of a bit backwards to ask this now, but to find more gold, it sounds like you're primarily going to focus this year drilling at Ranch. You see higher return potential there. What's
That's
the
right.
reason for these gold anomalies not being prioritized, or it's just low sulfidation being tricky and sort of discrete usually, and that's why you don't want to pursue it, or around lawyers, or do you just think Ranch is superior?
Well, Ranch has that blue sky potential and the better potential for porphyry. So we believe that's should be our number one focus for exploration for upgrading the overall resource. And it's not as simple as it just being a gold anomaly to go test it. We need to make sure that the structures are all aligning well, and we have, usually we also use geophysics like IP to help out with the targeting. So usually need multiple points of evidence to start sinking those drill holes. And so I wouldn't put it past me this summer, though, is to go out and walk some of these areas, just to see like a reconnoitering and mapping program to see what we can see. But in terms of drilling, it's certainly not part of the plan, just expanding the resource close to home.
And is the low sulfidation sort of upper level environment preserved there? I presume it's not. You don't have sinters, all of that is eroded away, and things like that you would see, because it's fairly close to surface, the actual gold.
That's correct. Yeah. It's mineralization's right to surface here, and we don't preserve the paleo landform. So the very top of the system has been eroded away. But that was fortunate for us to be able to, bring this resource right to surface for the open pit mine plan.
It shaves off like 200-300 meters of non-economically interesting stuff. So that's very good.
Yeah, it was. We were very fortunate with that.
And here at Lawyers, is topography fairly consistent across these gold anomalies, or could you see some locations where it is vastly different, or is it generally sort of within plus minus 100 meters, something like this?
Oh, plus minus 100, but that's sort of the case at our property overall. Is while we are in the mountains, it's relatively subdued, especially compared to, let's say, the rest of the Golden Triangle. It's we are in the Alpine, but it isn't steep valleys. They're quite gentle valleys, and it's easy to walk. So we don't have that much of a topography effect to worry about.
Okay, so let's pop over to Ranch, because there's, I guess, speak about what the deposit looks like there, what's open near deposit, and what other gold targets, I guess, we see there first, and then we'll speak about the porphyry targets a bit later.
Okay. Yep. So just leaving Lawyers and heading up 35 kilometers approximately to the northwest, and this is Ranch. And you can see here the gold anomalies are a little bit different in terms of they're a little bit tighter, less sprawling, but they are well coincident with the high sulfidation epithermal mineralization that we see at Ranch. So overall, Ranch is a high sulfidation epithermal system. It's sitting in a preserved lithocap, and mineralization seems to be focused in these preserved feeder structures that are defined by silicic alteration, which is great because they're resistant. So they're easy to find at surface. So the clays around it erode away quickly, sort of leaving these spires of silicic alteration and mineralization. And you can see, once again, there's a series of open pit plans. And some of these have been exploited before, but right now, our main zones for mining will be the Ridge and Bonanza area up here, and then what's called the Thesis corridor here. And so Thesis corridor consists of Thesis 2, Thesis 3, and Bingo. And so let's focus in at first on the Ridge Bonanza area. So let's see if I could just give this a tilt. So instead of at Lawyers, we were looking at lithology in the drill holes. And here I've just put on gold because I'm not showing the MSO stopes here. So just so you get a sense of where the mineralization is. And so what you see is it's also here quite steeply dipping. And these silica zones are thicker typically than what we see in the low sulfidation epithermal, so at Lawyers. So we get these really thick domains of mineralization. And so that's actually a really great boon about Ranch. They're hosted in strongly leached and vuggy silica. So that's where most of the mineralization is focused. And as I said earlier, that makes exploration for them. It lends its hand for that because you could just look for silicic alteration, and that really helps. Just like Lawyers, but not in the same way. It's structurally controlled, but you can see mineralization is more scattered about. So sometimes you get these stacked forms of mineralization. Sometimes you get these steeply dipping mineralization that conforms to the fault systems. And so mineralization here is actually, its distribution is a little bit more tricky than just chasing the structures that we see at Lawyers. There's actually a very similar situation in the Thesis corridor over here. You can see there's these sort of stacked domains, but in certain directions, it's also, there's steeply dipping domains. And a lot of these pits are fairly shallow, but there is this great vertical continuity, right? So once again, we're benefiting from a hybrid mine plan where you can mine through open pit, the high grade, shallow mineralization, but it has this great potential at depth as well to change into underground mining techniques.
And what sort of grades are you seeing towards depth? Is there any change, a vertical zonation of the gold, or?
There, it's pretty wild at Ranch. So first of all, each ore zone has sort of its own flavor to it, including which elements are present. So actually at Bonanza and Ridge, it's very high in bismuth. So it's almost also a bismuth deposit, which is a critical mineral, but it's high gold and silver grade, but as well as copper. Whereas in the Thesis corridor, there is copper, quite a bit of copper at Bingo, but it's mostly gold and silver here, and it pinches and swells at depth, but we're very encouraged with this high grade, these very, hundreds of meters in some cases of 1% equivalent, or 1 gram per ton equivalent of gold. So does it change with depth? It does in terms of its flavor, in terms of what elements come with it, but in terms of gold equivalent grade, it's actually pretty consistent.
And these existing sort of ore bodies that are constrained now within the resource, do you see any, would you highlight any directions except this for depth in terms of expansion?
Yeah. So there's one of our plans is to test some areas that are open at Bingo. So this is what we're planning on this summer. Let's just see if I can rotate this around without making everyone sick. And so this is Bingo, but you can see there's areas that are untested with the potential for continuity of mineralization. So we have these at depth down here. There's a whole area that's untested. Over here, down here. So there's a lot of potential actually at depth here, and a few of our drill holes actually ended in mineralization as well. And so one of the plans this summer is to sink some holes and expand what we're seeing at Bingo. It's not as easy as just saying that, though. Bingo is a confusing deposit. It has the structures there are not completely understood at this point. So there is some work we need to do this summer so that we can drill smartly. It's not as easy as necessarily just chasing a particular structure. So we're going to use whatever tools we have available to us to help us pick how we're going to try to expand this resource.
But at Bingo, it looks like, I mean, if you hit there, would that be a case of the pit potentially being extended down then, or would it be an underground? What do you think?
This would be underground stuff for sure.
Okay, right. And this will be a few holes, it looks like. I mean, initially you'll do one, and if it's good, you'll follow up. So discretionary sort of allocation.
100%. Yeah, that's the plan here. There's some great things to test. There's really high grade copper mineralization that could be tested. So there's a few different flavors that we could chase here. Obviously prioritizing probably the gold zones, but it's a very interesting deposit for sure.
And I mean, across range, what other sort of allocations or what other targets do you want to test? I mean, we'll get to the other target styles, but in terms of primarily gold, silver going into the main project being advanced initially,
right.
What other targets like that do you have that you will pursue?
Right. Okay. So besides expanding at Bingo, there is a discovery that was made last year, and that's the ring zone. That's down here. So this is sort of the Thesis expansion. This is ring zone, so it's kind of close to that area. And so we'll definitely be chasing this mineralization this summer and testing the ring zone. So what's great about the ring zone is we've got shallow mineralization that was found, and there's structures that run across it. And so we're going to chase those structures and test the boundaries of the ring zone. And there's also, as you can see, potential at depth down here. So we're getting, it's spotty, but it's quite a broad zone of mineralization. And so we feel this is worth following up on for sure. So that's the ring zone. And I can actually show you something interesting. You can see that, in this gold anomaly, it's somewhat tied into, this previously known mineralization over here. But if we flip on the Molly anomaly, you can see this broad zone of mineralization is heading down in towards these areas of Molly anomalism. So if we just don't think about gold in terms of pathfinders, there is this really great potential at depth instead of just focusing on the near surface.
But the near surface sort of target at the ring zone, what sort of scale could you see there in terms of tonnage, hypothetically? I mean, obviously you'll have to test these things to see if it's mineralized.
Wow. I think,
could it be significant, do you think?
I think it can be significant, absolutely. So it really depends on, there's really clear structures that run through here. So it kind of depends on how well it's mineralized across that structure. But I do feel like this is a great opportunity to potentially get another, especially with the shallow mineralization and the deep connector, another chance for a pit with an underground opportunity. Especially so close to southern mins. Sorry.
What sort of grades are you seeing there in the initial hole, especially the shallow intercept, and what's the width approximately? Obviously only one data point, and these things sort of narrow as you go along.
So you see it is continuous across multiple holes here, but so it is, I would say at the moment, we've got about 30 meters at 1.6 grams per ton gold. So that's not even gold equivalent. Like actual gold is, 30 meters at 1.6. I think we have 10 meters at 2.8. So it is reasonably high grade, but we need to find broader zones or deeper zones of mineralization. So testing beneath it along strike, and especially testing down here.
And how deep is that shallower zone? Is that like 100 meters deep or 50 meters deep?
This is 36 meters deep. So it's very shallow.
I mean, it's very, very open pitable then.
Exactly, yes. So, at Ranch, we've got expanding bingo and chasing mineralization at Ring.
And with the ring zone, I mean, how much do you think you need to? I mean, as a first pass, you'll step out, I presume, maybe would it be 100-meter increments if you have potentially a kilometer of continuation in the structure, or how would you approach it?
That exactly what you're saying. So just stepping out at consistent intervals to test that, whether it's through a series of shallow holes as we go this way, and maybe deeper holes as we get closer to those other anomalies. It should be nice, quick drilling in those shallow holes, so we should be able to, define its northerly extent pretty quickly.
But I mean, it sounds like that zone, if it plays out, could be one of the more significant ore bodies at Ranch. That'd be a fair assessment.
I think.
Or will it be tough?
I think it's sort of mixed. So there's like the Thesis corridor, I would say, is the most significant, and there's only, a few that are well defined at the moment. So I don't really have a comment on how this will stack up to all of its neighbors per se, but I think it's something that we need to define, and I believe it has potential to be something that will help expand our resource at Ranch.
Are there any other gold targets being tested at Ranch this year?
Absolutely. A couple of my favorite, actually. So if we go down to the south, so in this area here, so we're not really seeing that tight gold anomaly here in the soils. You can see it's kind of just further down to the south and east, like where we're best seeing it. But this area is called Steve. The Steve zone is a high sulfidation epithermal target as well, even though it doesn't have that gold anomaly associated with it. But what it does have, similar to Ring, is a really shallow, relatively shallow intercept of high grade mineralization. And it has these really deep zones of high sulfidation epithermal mineralization. So you've got that shallow potential for an open pit, as well as the deep underground potential. And you can see it's really open in a lot of directions here. Fortunately, it's defined. So what attracted us to it is it's defined by these silicic spires, as we were talking about. So those feeder zones that tend to be mineralized, and they outcrop at surface. There's 3 of them. And so it was drill tested, got this shallow mineralization, and fortunately, we were able to find much deeper mineralization as well. So this is over 100 meters at around a gram per ton gold equivalent. So that's a fairly significant interval. And so it's open, obviously, to the south, to the east, to the west, at depth. In the shallow areas, it's open to the north as well as the east, and there's room to be tested to the west. And so this will be one of our significant focuses, and I think this one has really great potential, sort of more of what you were sort of trying to, I think, we're trying to get at for the Ring zone, and what I thought there is actually more of what I think about the Steve zone.
could you try to sort of indicate what sort of scale you see there for the gold potential?
Okay, sure.
And
So
then
I see.
how you would go about testing it ideally this year.
Okay, great. Good question. So, so from the high sulfidation epithermal point of view, there's really two things we'd like to test. One is the shallow component. And so that can be done in a series of drill holes going north, as well as heading off to the east. And another target at Steve we would like to further expand is the deep zone of mineralization. So this is quite a significant intercept. You can see it has horizontal capacity as well. And so we would like to see if we can extend this to the south as well as the east. And so, probably up to half of the exploration drilling, I would imagine we would like to do in the Steve area.
So these two deeper zones, do you think that they can be projected upwards closer to surface? Or do you
Absolutely.
think yeah.
Yes. So one of the things, so let's take like a side view here. So while this zone that we see of the shallow mineralization kind of has a shallow dip to it, with reasonable vertical continuity, there's a break in the mineralization in these zones that I think are going to have much more vertical capacity to it. So we're definitely going to test the zone above it to look for the vertical continuity of the deeper ore area.
And then stepping out is sort of more towards the right in the image now that you're showing from the side.
Yeah.
I mean, so structurally you can go on strike there, sort of along the strike.
Absolutely.
You can go up dip, I guess, of these deeper intersections. Can you
Yeah.
go even further to the right as well and find more mineralization if you would take these deep holes?
Yes.
And also towards surface too.
But therein lies, sort of a connector story to the porphyry world.
Right.
Is something that we're thinking about over here. So we do want to chase this high sulfidation mineralization this way, but we have a few reasons to be interested in targeting over here, like a little bit more blindly, based on some geophysics that we have.
But it's sort of as an exploration target for Steve, sort of the gold component at Steve. Can you give a sense of what you could see? I mean, you can't speak to amount of ounces, but in terms of a tonnage based on the structural interpretation currently, could you see this being bulking out to being the most significant open pit at Ranch, or what sort of impact could it have should it be successful?
Yeah, I think at a very minimum, it's going to be a great complement. But I think it has the potential to be as big as deposits that we see at Bonanza and Ridge, as well as in the Thesis corridor. I think this is going to have significant mineralization, and to how far it extends is a great question. Like, is it going to be a series of deposits, kind of like what we see in the corridor? Because just down to the southwest, we have Patty, and it has pretty decent and broad intercepts of mineralization as well. And so sort of finding out the continuity between these ore zones is something we would like to test.
And realistically, I mean, with the amount of drilling you're able to do this year, which is, I guess, we sort of spoke with Ewan about that, but it should be 10 to 15,000 kilometers or 10 to 15 kilometers drilling or something like that.
That's right.
What could you prove out with this sort of constraint this year for these zones? What would the approach be? Would you try to you step out 100-meter increments, or what scale do you think you can prove if it goes very well?
Absolutely. Like this Steve zone will eat up kilometers pretty quickly because of how deep these drill holes actually are. So at depth here, this is 540 meters. So these are quite deep targets that we're looking to expand on. And so we're going to plan some systematic drilling to test where these are open to the north. So 100-meter step outs in different directions. as well as sinking the deeper high sulfidation drill holes, following the trends that we're able to see, as well as using the geophysics, the IP that we have available to us to help define where we're going to, the pierce points for our drill targets.
Okay. Is there anything else in terms of gold, silver, sort of adjoining into the existing, main project being developed first you want to highlight before we move over to the other style targets?
No, those are sort of the main targets that we're going to look at from exclusively the high sulfidation epithermal lens. So those gold targets. So it's just to recap. So up at Bingo, sort of expanding the resource there, chasing the structures and mineralization that we see at Ring, as well as expanding Steve in every direction.
Okay, so walking through the environmental permitting process, could you just more granularly, step by step, explain, what inputs are required to get through this process, and sort of explain why the timeline is what it is that you're characterizing? It's going to be done by 2027 sometime, step by step.
Yeah, for sure. So we won't be done by 2027. It'll be right now our guidance is 2028, and 2027. On the timeline and the presentation, maybe that's what you're referring to. That
submission.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the submission. So the process is really ongoing engagement, which we've been doing for a long time, and then as I mentioned, September, we begin the process. That will be submitting our initial project description, which is just a kind of high-level overview that is reviewed by the nations and goes to the government. And you provide a summary of engagement as well at the same time, or just after. And then, that will take, probably several months to 6 months. And then you submit a detailed project description, which is still relatively high level. I mean, there's quite a lot of flexibility in this. I mean, but what you're pointing to is, conceptually at this time, this is where we're going to build a mill. Tailings are going to go here, waste rocks over here. Here's the footprint of the mine. And, it outlines, what it's going to look like. And then, if all of this is approved, then, the environmental process essentially starts, and it's process planning. And then you essentially submit your application, and that then will be kind of under review. You get a lot of feedback on it, and that's kind of the 2027 milestone. There is submitting the application. Then there will be a bunch of comments. You'll submit the application back to them. You get a revised application, probably accepted at that point. Then you get an effects and assessment recommendation, essentially. And then after that, it's notice of consent. So you get your EA certificate and a decision, basically.
And the First Nations sort of permit or agreement, how does that feed into the EA? Is that an official document that you would have to have signed, or have you reached that point already with the First Nations? I mean, you usually have some sort of profit sharing structuring in BC, from what I have seen, where you give equity or some sort of profit sharing to the First Nations. How does that feed into the process, or the sort of timeline?
So it's not built into the EA process itself. I mean, so I think, what you were probably talking about, like impacts benefit agreement, or an IBA, is normally known as. Yeah. And, we will probably start that process pretty soon with the nations, but, until you have some more detailed economics on the project, so until kind of post PFS, let's say, until you have a better handle on what it's going to look like, you typically start post that discussions anyway. And that I guess those two things end up in tandem, where you're continuing to improve the project economics, or reduce the risk through the different engineering phases, and moving the permitting along at the same time. So the IBA kind of falls in the middle of all of that. So no IBA at the moment, but we have a long form agreement in place with Taklakwadach and Sekideni. It's a trilateral agreement. And we also have an exploration agreement with the Taltan.
So, I mean, the interesting thing here, because, I mean, you're expending quite a bit of money here at Ranch trying to find more gold, essentially, primarily to build out the mine life and potentially, augment the scale of the project. But the question becomes, do you have the time to make any significant revisions of that respect before you sort of need to get crystal due to the permitting process? So, I mean, could you foresee exploration success actually leading to an increase in plant size, whatever, because you find 1.5 million more ounces of gold, that's logical to just upsize the initial scale. Is that in the cards, or would you, due to sort of the nature of the permitting process, you sort of need to lock into a baseline scenario after the PFS quite quickly?
So I guess you mentioned baseline, Glenda. So I mean, we've collected baseline across the entire project area and a kind of big buffer zone around the projects. And the deposits at Ranch, most of that resource probably actually won't make it into the PFS, but we've collected baseline data over this to kind of future-proof it, I'd say, through the permitting process. As I said, the early stages, so the initial project description, detailed project description, those are pretty high level still. So there's quite a lot of flexibility in the EA process to provide revisions and edits up until probably sometime in 2027. So you've effectively got another couple of years drill program if we stay on this timeline. Now, I mean, yes, potentially. I think there's potential there to add 1.5 million ounces, but that's all dependent on how much success we have for the drill bit, and if we find another kind of phenomenal asset at Ranch, then yeah, I mean, it could change. But from my perspective at the moment, we have enough critical mass to keep moving this forward. The project economics are solid. The production profile is good. Let's just keep moving this forward, keep de-risking it. And at the same time, we can just scale up or down the exploration. And if we have good success, then fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, if you make a discovery this year, you would have the time next year to drill that out sufficiently to put it into the confidence level required to be included in the EA sort of application and consequently the feasibility study as well coming up.
No, probably not. Yeah,
probably not. Okay.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily see that as like a major problem. I mean, it's just pointing to more upside on the project, and a lot of variables here, and things may change. But if you know that you've got a lot more ounces in the ground, you can just keep working on that and then bring it in as a kind of satellite deposit at a later date. Marathon did that when they were developing Valentine, but I think it was called Barry or Berry deposit, brought it in at a later date. We could do something similar. So I think there's a lot of flexibility.
So strategy would definitely be to stay sort of in the inferred, to showcase the potential category, to allow other corporates or to sort of understand that there's a pathway to adding several more million ounces, and not get into expending millions and millions of dollars and trying to infill drill something out when you already have critical mass, as you say. You don't see that making sense. Maybe in a sort of extreme scenario, perhaps, but low probability. Fair to say.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty good summary.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that's pretty clear. So in the PFS that's coming now, do you see any noteworthy, or what should people expect? Are there any revisions from the PEA, or what would you point to as being some significant changes, if any?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's going to be any significant changes, to be honest. I think, as I said, we went through that Call Guys review with Asenko and Ryan, and plus they didn't raise any major red flags or anything. I think, the scope and scale is probably going to remain unchanged, but there's a number of trade-off studies going on at the moment, for the mine scheduling. So whether that's like a cutoff grade stope optimizers, or like hella value optimization, or looking at Ranch underground and whether that makes sense. where does that open pit to underground transition happen at Lawyers? Is it better to take more underground as higher grade, or have the pits pull deeper? How does that affect the economics? Because the stuff at the base of the pits, is obviously going to come in end of the mine life. Whereas if we can capture higher grade material earlier on from the underground, is that more impactful? So it's looking at a number of scenarios like that for the mine scheduling, but then also, optimizing waste rock, tailings, plant design. Can we reconfigure it? Does flotation make the most sense? And then also looking at refining the metallurgy. Right now the flow sheet is crush, grind, gravity, and then depending on the sulfur content and the silver, they either go to flotation or the CIL, and the cutoffs around where it goes to, whether it goes to float or leach. We're working on tweaking that as well. So there's a number of trade-off studies underway, but really it's all around optimization. I don't think you'll see any kind of large-scale shifts in the PFS.
And would you say, going from a PEA to a solid PFS with a good, engineering company doing the work is a big deal in terms of de-risking. Would you say, and that's valuable in itself, and it can, PEAs can look very flattering, put it that way. But do you think that the most of these activities will be biased towards having positive impact on the economics compared to the PEA, or what's your gut feeling on that? It's sort of metallurgy question, right? You have a low sulfidation, a high sulfidation, two deposits. You're gonna have to mix or blend those, I presume, and I would see, and the silver component as well, doing more rigorous work, I would presume could be positive, because I would assume you've been quite conservative in the PEA with lower data density.
Yeah, the metallurgical, the recoveries were excellent already. I think for gold it was 95%, and then for silver it was 92%. And the silver actually came up a long way from the standalone PEA that was on the Lawyers project that came out in 2022. I think silver recoveries at that point were in the mid-60s. So it's improved substantially with the metallurgical work that we continued to do. There's no deleterious elements or anything in there either. So I see that probably having a positive impact, to be honest. And all of the trade-off studies are, that's the objective, is to try and improve on what we already have. So I don't see there being any kind of negatives coming out of the work that we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, and I think we sort of had the conversation about the feasibility. When you look to that step, you would need to do more infill drilling. That would be sort of the primary capital expenditure activity, I presume. But could you see, and we sort of had the conversation, could you upscale or do some more design revisions? Could you see anything happening between the PFS and the FS that would be of significance, or would you see it be fairly similar between the two as a base case?
Yeah. So all of our work for the PFS is completed at the moment, and I think one of the nice things about this project is that for the 3 million mineable ounces that we had in the PEA, 90% of that was measured and indicated, and we've actually improved that a little bit with some of the drilling that we did last year in the summer. So we don't have to go back and do a big infill program. The measured and indicated, I think we're at a minimum. It's at 35 meter centers, so the deposit's very well understood. There's great continuity there. It's a pretty simple system, especially at Lawyers. At Ranch, that's where most of the inferred ounces are, and we probably will convert some of those to measured and indicated, the kind of critical ounces that would have a material impact on the economics for, ounces that would be mined early in the mine life, depending on where Ranch ends up in the mine schedule. But there's not going to be a huge infill drill program or anything. Really, I think most of the drilling will be around what we discussed earlier, in terms of geotech, hydro, metallurgical testing, and a lot of that will be focused on, honestly, on the underground to really kind of understand the geotechnical constraints.
And could you foresee any sort of, you're doing these optimization studies now, right? Do you see any potential for, the sequencing of development? I presume now it's just open pit, start open pit, and then when you get to the bottom, you do underground. Could you see any parallel scenarios where you delineate some higher grade stuff a bit deeper potentially at ranch, and you try to drive down and extract those high quality ounces to improve payback or something like this earlier? Or do you think it's unlikely?
No, all of that's been evaluated at the moment, yeah. And I mean, even in the PEA, the conceptual plan was to have the underground come on very early in the mine life. So I think it was year 2, so essentially the pits would be being mined at the same time as we're developing the underground. And a lot of the rationale for that is the head grade of underground is about 3.5 grams, and the pit's been about 1.5 grams. So it's really for pretty minimal development costs, because the underground is pretty simple. It's just one straight simple decline that goes underneath Duke's Ridge, underneath Cliff Creek. You can pull in those higher grade ounces earlier that had a material impact on the economics. So I think you'd see that sequencing again, I assume, based on what I'm currently hearing, and also evaluating at what point it makes sense to bring in ranch, whether it's earlier on or towards the end of the mine life. But ranch is a little bit higher grade. And then I think one of the other things is looking at, do we put in the flotation circuit straight away, or do we delay that a couple of years? I mean, because I think that's probably on the order of $50-60 million in the capex. So, if you can delay that, is it impactful, or do you want it up front to improve the silver recoveries and have ranch come in early on? So a lot of work going on right now to understand what the best sequence is.
But put it this way, I mean, most of these sort of trade-offs will be fairly crystal between the PFS and the FS, at least. So, I mean, what's decided in the PFS is fairly likely going to convert, at least in a sort of development scenario, into the FS, because you're not going to drill much more at lawyers. You might drill some more at ranch, but there's not going to be that much more sort of revelations in terms of geology for the main deposits, probably.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair comment.
Okay, well, I mean, that's good. Just a bit of a sort of a financial exercise from this point in time to get to, I guess we could go with EA submission, let's say. What would you say is the full capital expenditure between now and then? All the development activities required, and then let's say you're quoted 3 million CAD per year, whatever. Maintenance cost, something like this.
It is, I mean, it's pretty difficult to answer. There's a lot of variables in there around permitting, the studies, wrapping up some of the baseline work. I couldn't give you a concrete answer. I'd be stretching, I think, and I'd rather give you something solid if I had it. So, what might be a good idea is if we touch base again in a few months and we can kind of recap where we're at, and I think I'll have a much more solid idea of what that timeline looks like and what that expenditure is going to look like once we actually begin the permitting process in September.
Right. I mean, you're doing 12 now with all those activities, plus, let's say, +3. And then you go to 26, so that's +3 for just maintenance costs. And let's go +3 again for 27. So that's 16, 15, that's 21 for maintenance and full all development activities in this year. So 26, I mean, would you assume that 26 is similar to 25 in terms of expenditure? Because you're going to embark on the FS then, and you'll probably, I mean, and you're starting with the EA process. Do you think it's going to be similar in terms of development expenditure in 26, or is it going to ramp up comparatively from 25? Could be useful to get a sense at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are probably reasonable numbers, but I mean, we're also going to be growing the team over the coming 18 months to 2 years, so that G&A is probably going to expand a bit. On top of that, we will have to complete the additional engineering work on site, the field-based component of it. So, yeah, there will be additional expenses on top of that.
Okay. We'll return to this one in 3-4 months or something like that. It's an interesting question because the reason why it's interesting to me is because you're doing the development and exploration simultaneously, which is it's a game that can be played, and I think you should do it. You should be aggressive with the setting and everything, but it has to be done thoughtfully so you don't overstretch yourself.
Exactly. And I think that's the key thing. I mean, we're in a very fortunate position where we actually have the ability to, we've got a very solid project, but there's still lots of upside. I mean, most companies that doesn't exist. They've pretty clearly defined and drilled off whatever it is that they're moving forward with. I mean, even on the Lawyers project, for example, all of the underground is open at depth as well. But it doesn't make sense for us to do a lot of deep drilling at Lawyers to continue expanding that underground because they're all at least 600-meter holes at this point. They're expensive, and once we put in the decline, we could do drilling underground for much more cost effectively. So you're right. It's a very you have to be very careful about balancing advancing the project and the budget associated with that. And that to continue demonstrating what upside exists and leveraging that potential.
Excellent. We'll let Evan take the mic now and sort of really dig through the exploration potential component here and just go through everything.
All right. So we've heard, all about Lawyers Ranch, the main epithermal mineralizations, low and high, and gotten a sense of what the expansion potential looks like there for the coming years. But if we focus on the new style targets, obviously, there's been a lot of excitement in the district, discoveries with AMARC, joint venture, TDG as well, lots of activity and new porphyry discoveries. And you sit on fertile porphyry land as well, and you've worked up some interesting targets. So we should definitely talk about that. So I'll let you sort of walk through what you see or where you're at with that targeting.
Okay, so in terms of porphyry targeting, we actually head right back to Steve. And so if we zoom in to Steve here, this is still the gold contour, but I would just like to highlight in these drill holes, looking at the alteration assemblage. As we go down hole, we start getting higher illite crystallinities in the white micas. And so that's indicating getting higher and higher temperature, like it's a more stable mica structure, which is consistent with higher temperature. And they're actually stable micas. And so that's consistent with what you see in sort of the deep feeder zones for high sulfidation and in lithocaps, as well as like poking through into that transition area into the shallow porphyry environment, into that zone of upward flaring phyllic alteration as it transitions into the root zones of porphyries, of the lithocap. And so I just wanted to highlight that we do see this down here before taking you over to the Google Earth image that I have with some other plots. All right, so this is a Google Earth of the ranch area. And so just to get your eye in, sort of, this is the area of the Thesis corridor. This is Albert's Hump. Up here's Bingo, Ridge, and Bonanza up here. And this is Steve, the Steve area down here, and this is Patty. And so what I also have plotted is the 450 meter depth slice of IP, as well as surface molly anomalies. And so this is not the soils, this is actual surface rock samples. And so if we zoom in a little bit here, if you remember those drill holes that were going off to the east, and I was saying they were getting higher and higher temperature, those are actually trending down towards this high chargeability anomaly that we see right out here. And so remember, this is a 450 meter depth slice. So this is actually 450 meters underground. And so we have, high illite crystallinity, heading this way, and we have a chargeability anomaly. And so this is actually an area of interest to test for porphyry, but our IP only goes down to this depth. And so we're actually going to run an IP survey this summer with Simcoe going down to view as close to 1 kilometer depth as we can. And we're going to sort of back over this area all the way up to the Golden Furlong and include Ring out here. And there's a few reasons for that. So one is we want that deep view of a chargeability anomaly out towards this porphyry target. But then if you're considering these moly anomalies, which is a much better approach to exploration for porphyry in a lithocap than looking for copper, the copper is leached away and the moly is a little bit more stable than the copper in this high acidic oxidized environment. And so looking for these moly anomalies usually helps delineate where you might have the highest porphyry potential. So we could see we're limited in terms of outcrop. So these are just sort of like where you can find outcrop, but we're getting these screaming moly anomalies, like up over anything that's these big pink dots, that's up over 100 ppm moly, which is very high values for being embedded in a lithocap. And so we're actually pretty excited that we're getting these moly anomalies, as well as the chargeability anomaly, as well as the illite crystallinity increase. And so that's giving us a lot of reasons to further explore this area for porphyry. This is called Mandusa right here. So this is actually a high sulfidation epithermal target as well that I haven't talked about yet. But it has all these flavors for porphyry here as well. So really high moly anomalies up to 500, 600 ppm. We've also found a brecciaclast with truncated porphyry vein in it. And so we're really excited also to test out over by Mandusa and extend all the way up as close as we can get to the Golden Furlong right here. But we don't have the drill holes planned yet for this area outside Mandusa because we need to wait to get the IP geophysics back to help guide us with where we're going to put the drill holes.
Why do you think the IP? I mean, we've seen with porphyry exploration. I mean, how would you want to interpret the IP? Because I mean, IP anomalism generally sort of points you in the direction of the pyrite.
That's correct. Yeah.
What other data sets, or how would you sort of approach that anomaly? It's difficult to say, I guess. But would you layer it with other geophysical methods and?
Well, we have VTEM to 400 meters, but that's a bit too shallow, I think, to get a good picture into the porphyry environment. The IP will look down to a kilometer. And so we're really going to look for those chargeability anomalies. And as you said, sort of try to identify those large plumes of pyrite. And so that's a great, which is what we'd expect in the phyllic alteration. So in that transition zone between a lithocap and a porphyry. And, you really look for, it's a fairly significant anomaly. Like it's not going to be a small anomaly. So any of these, there's a few reasons why you could get high chargeability, but with these other points of data that we have, so the moly anomalism and the whatever SWIR we've done to date, really, you use that in conjunction with those large chargeability anomalies to help with the testing. So it's sort of multiple pieces of evidence, and each of those chargeability anomalies, because we know we're in that environment, it's probably worth testing just to confirm what is the source of that chargeability anomaly. And, we really believe that there is really high porphyry potential here.
But at this particular sort of level of preservation, you generally expect the porphyry potential to be underground scenario, since I mean you know that you're in the sort of the gold from surface zone for low sulfidation and high sulfidation. So you would expect the porphyries generally to be, I don't know what the standard is, but some 100 meters below where you see the high and low sulfidation.
That's correct. So the porphyry, typically will sit beneath the lithocap. And so that could be, if there's no telescoping in the area, that could be 1.5 kilometers beneath it. So like if you're thinking of the source of the lithocap, if the porphyry is the source. But the one great thing about porphyries is they like to occur in clusters. And so you could actually have porphyries that have punctured higher up into the system that might not be related to the lithocap. And so you can get moly anomalism associated with that as well. But it's a different vectoring strategy. And so that's why, looking for these chargeability anomalies and not just the deep roots necessarily of the lithocap could prove to be a useful exploration strategy. And so, we will be looking for any of the intrusions that helped, degast and produce this lithocap, but also suspicious that there could be other porphyries lurking around that may not be genetically related to the lithocap as well.
But in the outcrop, you're not seeing any sort of alteration, porphyry alteration, or distal porphyry alteration on the surface in any locations as of yet. It's very much preserved and hidden.
That's correct. So we would be expecting. So that's why the exploration is thinking about sort of the tops of porphyry systems. And so that's the type of thing we're going to be looking for. And so, taking a close look at the micas and the pyrite, is something we're going to think about very closely. There is signs of potassic alteration as well that we've seen, but it's been spotty. And so, we just got to put all of those things together and expect, our expectations are there's probably quite deep porphyry here and also some shallow porphyry. So up to just a few 100 meters below surface. But as you said, a lot of those signs are preserved and hidden from surface.
So in terms of, but it sounds like, and you're doing the IP first and doing this geophysics program, you will have that data back when? Approximately like August, September, so towards the end of the summer?
No, we're going to get daily updates. And so they'll be sending us, we have planned about 78 line kilometers and in a 5 kilometer swaths. And so the profile is about 5 kilometers wide, and they'll send us fresh every morning a slice to help with our planning. And so we're actually going to start, from the south first and work our way up these anomalies. And they're going to be starting in late June. And so we're actually going to be expecting by late July that we're going to have a lot of the significant areas covered with first pass data. What you're saying, though, about when we expect the IP data back, that's when we might have our 3D inversion. But we will have guiding slices to help us pick our targets carefully.
So interpreted data would be somewhere on there, and you would, I mean, if you have sort of a nice setup, you would be willing to basically on the geophysics, more or less as our IP as the primary targeting method, you would be willing to design some drill holes and go out and test that towards later in the year.
Yes, that's correct. And so that's why, while it's a 10 kilometer drill plan for exploration, and we have, some really close, some targets at Steve and at Bingo and at Ring, we don't want to use up all of our drill budget just on proving those out. We would like to also sink some holes to test for these porphyries based on the best information we can get. So that's the IP anomalism, as well as these surface anomalies of moly following the structure. And there's something else I haven't shown you here yet. So remember, so this is Steve, and over here is Mandusa. We don't have any drill holes at Mandusa. we have this great Moly anomalism. We have a brecciaclast that has truncated porphyry veins in it. But also, if I can switch back to the leapfrog. So this is Steve, and so that the IP server that currently exists kind of goes around it. And over here is where that Mandusa was and some of those other anomalies. But if we put on Tellurium, we actually get a really, really telling anomaly of Tellurium right here. Also, Moly. So we've got Moly in soils, we have Tellurium in soils, we've got the IP, we've got the surface samples. And so we're going to use all of those to help with our testing. And you can see there is some coincidence between the Tellurium and Moly anomalism too with the high sulfidation epithermal. So we do believe, like out at Mandusa and all throughout this corridor that we're calling the Golden Furlong Mandusa corridor, that there's really great potential for high sulfidation epithermal as well as that porphyry. And so we will be sort of thinking about both when we're doing that more regional testing in this area. So just to the east and to the north of Steve.
So this is the sort of porphyry exploration at Ranch, but you mentioned also that you also have, I know, similar targets at Lawyers. Could you sort of speak to what the data looks like there and what the plans are to advance that or those targets?
Sure. So just to get your eye back in, this is Cliffs Creek, this is Duke's Ridge, this is AGB, and what you see behind it all is the gold in soils. And if we switch to Tellurium in soils, we can see it really highlights this area to the west. And this area out here has porphyry potential to it as well. We don't have as much information to it to just go out testing it now, and it's not a high priority porphyry target, but it just sort of illustrates the porphyry potential that we think does exist in both Lawyers and Ranch area. And so this Tellurium, if I put on, actually, I don't have Moly visible, but you saw up at Ranch, the Tellurium and Moly overlapped each other pretty nicely. And we also, in the drilling that we have done so far at Silver Pond, there is a lot of, we see what we think is advanced argillic alteration, and we get a bunch of micas, and there's really acidic alteration there. And so we think we're in that transition area between lithocap and porphyry here as well. But this needs to be tested a little bit more, maybe with some surface mapping this summer. So I will probably walk this ground and do some mapping, but it's not a priority for doing doing drilling.
And across the wider land package, are there any other targets you would like to highlight? You think are sort of, I mean, you'll advance many things in terms of baseline data generation, I'm sure,
Mm-hmm.
but anything that's up for drilling potentially later in the year as you?
Not up for drilling. So our budget of 10 kilometers to 15 kilometers, will get used up at expanding Cliffs Creek South at Lawyers, and a few drill holes at Bingo, expanding Ring, expanding Steve, and the porphyry exploration in the Mandusa Golden Furlong corridor. And so there isn't a plan to do any of these regional targets, but you can see there is a smattering of Tellurium anomaly that we get all across Lawyers. And if we look up, at Ranch, this is to the southeast of Steve, and then further to the southeast, we have more anomalism in Tellurium soils. So there is, and well to the north here, but these are quite regional from our perspective. And, I think are something that we'll look at in the future, but not for 2025.
But if you look at the TDG and the A-mark sort of discoveries,
Mhm.
are they essentially sitting lower in the topography and lower down in the preservation, and they have sort of separate style porphyry targets? Or if you make the comparison, do you think there are any notable differences? What would be your analysis on that?
Yeah, there's definitely some differences, but one of the things that stands out to me about the recent A-mark discovery is that occurs much higher in the stratigraphy than the porphyry deposits that were currently understood within the Tutagon area, which really opens it up for us, because obviously we're high in the stratigraphy where we have the low sulfidation epithermal mineralization, but that A-mark discovery shows that porphyries occur up and down the stratigraphy within this region. So that was very exciting news for us to help encourage pushing forward with the porphyry discoveries here.
And at Ranch, I mean, you could see the potential similar corridor there being an analogy. But do you think, I mean, if you look at how they made that discovery, were they using tellurium and molybdenum as pathfinders, primary pathfinders as well, or were they able to rely on copper, copper in soils anomalism, a bit more sort of standard approach?
Well, they had outcropping at surface, some reasonable evidence. So they had like gossinous domains that they were able to see and tested that were mineralized. So we're encouraged to drill beneath that. We have actually, something similar here. If you let me switch back just for a second. So switching back, so this is Steve here. This is Mandusa, which isn't drill tested yet, and we can see some other anomalism here. We don't have a lot of outcrop at surface, and so we don't get as easily see well-preserved gossinous structures at surface, especially because we're at the high sulfidation epithermal level, like right at surface with the silicic alteration. But we do see, like here, there's a ferrocrete that's exposed at surface that we're interested in testing as well. So we do have, gossinous areas that outcrop at surface that we would like to test through whole rock sampling as well. And so that type of exploration is something we'll also be doing this summer. So going out and looking for areas that are gossinous and testing them with assay geochemistry.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're zooming in on this corridor as a primary target, working that up and likely drilling it towards the, during H2.
That's correct. Yeah.
In the bigger land package, I mean, it's a big land package you have. I mean, you haven't covered the entire thing with, comprehensive regional data generation in terms of identifying porphyry targets. I would presume, maybe I'm incorrect, but I would presume so. Are there any initiatives to try and do that, to do some wider, more spaced soil sampling campaigns to try to sniff out other potential large porphyry targets that could exist within the package? Or what's the plan in that respect? Or just data generation, new targets?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a large land package. We have areas of priority, and we aren't planning on doing any regional soils this year. More on the side of geological mapping and reconnaissance sampling. And there are a few areas of interest to follow up on to help guide us in that. We are also planning a mapping campaign in the East claim block. So we do have, in those regional areas, we are planning on work, but it's at the level of geological mapping and really trying to get a handle on the geology before we, get into soils or look for other types of anomalism. Is it's best to understand the rock package first. So because it's so regional, there is a lot of mapping and reconnoiter style boots on the ground work that needs to be done first. But you can see, like, we do have other areas where there is really nice anomalism that's nearby. So we'll probably go also, check out some of these nicely highlighted domains and see what we can see.
Right, but it sounds like with most of the land package still it's very nascent in terms of exploration. So you have your work cut out for you. Hopefully you can expand your team to really start working up this ground. But you have years now ahead of you where you're going to go through development with the main gold silver deposit. So you'll have plenty of time to make new discoveries. But this year you have these porphyry targets here at Ranch being sort of advanced and tested, and hopefully you'll be able to identify some new things as well throughout the exploration season.
That sums it up really well. That is what our focus is this year.
So before we wrap up, are there anything else you would like to mention, generally speaking, and you think is worthwhile that you think we've missed so far?
No, I think we covered. I want that we're doing an IP survey, and where and why, as well as looking at the that we do have high sulfidation epithermal potential, porphyry potential that we're going to be following up on, and the concepts of expanding at Ranch, Bingo, and Ridge, and Steve, as well as at Lawyers. We would like to look at the Lawyers Cliff Creek South and some of those deep stopes that look like they could that need some further testing.
Okay. Well, I think in which case, Evan, we'll wish you guys the best of luck, and I think we'll be back in 3-4 months again or something like this to see how the porphyry has advanced and get a check in on how the general drilling is going for the gold and silver. So
all right,
great to have you.
Thanks for your time, much appreciated.
Dual tracking exploration and development. We touched on that a bit earlier here. Can you just outline, if you just crystallize that point? I mean, what's your thinking on this? Creating shareholder value with these two capital-consuming activities, both will and has the potential to create value. Just how are you thinking about it? I mean, for example, you're chasing potential porphyry discovery. Let's say you make a porphyry discovery. A standalone porphyry discovery can get a company evaluation, which you currently have in BC, as we've seen with AMORC, and that's even within a joint venture. It's not the same as you, but if it were 100%, it would have been a higher valued company than you are probably right now. So if something like that happens, what's the plan? You're not going to drill out a porphyry, I presume. So you just outline how you're thinking in these permutations.
Yeah, I mean, it really wouldn't make sense to drill out a porphyry for us at this point. That would be, we'd have to raise a lot of capital, do a lot of drilling. It'd be pretty dilutive. But in saying that, I think we'd consider all our options. Looking at how we'd proceed with something like that, and we've talked about it internally. But we need to make that discovery first. So I'm just thankful that we have the opportunity and we have targets to test. I think we cross that bridge when we come to it, but rest assured, we're moving forward with developing our gold silver asset, and we're not chasing drilling off porphyry systems.
Yeah, but I mean, there is sort of higher level. You right now you're in a strong financial position. You're probably going to expend something similar, I would imagine, next year, maybe a bit more. And at your current valuation, I mean, you would expect to revalue probably by 30 to 50%, hopefully, with the capital you're expending now. Potentially even more if you make a discovery, right? And then you would be in a position where probably 10% dilution would take place to be able to do the next year, sort of, at least in my mind. So it's not that extreme, really. Even if you do a fairly aggressive exploration program. So,
I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, as we talked about earlier, I think that as we continue to de-risk the project, we should see significant share price appreciation as we move towards that construction decision. We're a couple of years behind Skeena, and I think their market cap at this point is like 1.7 billion or thereabouts. If you look at another just newly producing asset in BC, Artemis as well, I think their market cap at this point is 3 point something billion. So, our project, I think, is very simple. As we talked about earlier, it ticks a lot of the boxes. And, we've got a very clear strategy as we move forward here over the next couple of years to get towards construction.
And obviously, you've let Centerra through the door, so to speak. I mean, and you've been working that for quite some time, and we outlined who they are, why it makes sense to have them, and so on. Can you just go into greater detail? There's a clause where if they go up to 19.9, they're going to have a board member and so on. They also have sort of anti-dilutive rights. From your perspective, what do you think makes Centerra go up to 19.9? What would they like to see to do that? Is it a timing thing for them, just more like, or is there something specific they would like to see, some de-risking component? Has there been anything expressed from their part that you could share with us?
They haven't expressed anything to me. I mean, even in the if you look at the investor rights agreement, they have a 12-month standstill in there from signing the IRA, where within the 12 months they still have the ability to go up to 14.9%. They've got to buy those shares on the market. Post 9.9, they're going to have to file. So I think that would be very positive if we see that. But in terms of there's no mechanism for them to get to 19.9 except just buying shares on the market, and that can't happen until 12 months from now, essentially.
And so they're going to do a refresh PEA at KMS. What do you think is from in their seat? How would they approach this? Would they initiate that project and build that first, and then let's say, realistically, this company would like to acquire Thesis at some point in time, if everything goes according to plan. But when do you think they would do that? Would they do that when they have KMS in production, or could they go with putting this thing in production first? Or what makes sense from their point of view, you think?
I really don't know, to be honest. I think that would just be pure speculation. I mean, I think from us, we're just, just to take it back to Thesis, I think we're going to keep moving our asset forward as a standalone project. I mean, we've kind of gone through that. The economics are great. The production profile is good. It works as a standalone. But at the same time, we'll look at utilizing the infrastructure that's in place at KMS with Centerra. Is there some optionality there? And maybe that fits into what their longer term plans are for KMS. I'm not sure yet, but it's certainly. It's really nice to see them put out an updated resource, increase their exploration program at KMS, and indicate that they're going to have a PEA out by the end of the year, which I anticipate will be very positive as well. So it's great to see them kind of doubling down their efforts in BC.
When do you think, and this is also speculative again, so forgive me for asking, but when do you think KMS could be in production, hypothetically, if they were to really, push the envelope there?
Pretty quickly. I mean, all the permits are in place and everything, and it could be pretty quick. I'm hesitant to throw out a year, but quickly. I mean, it's a fully permitted mine that they'd have to do some upgrades in the mill, but it wouldn't be too long.
So they basically have a full plant on site because it's been in care and maintenance for more than a decade at this point in time.
Yeah, 2012. But I mean, it's a pretty active camp. I mean, we use the camp actually when we're in the winter months when we're doing baseline work. All that's in excellent condition. The mill is a 50,000 ton per day nameplate mill. They'd have to do some upgrades to it to get it back in operation, but it's in good shape.
How many clicks from that plant itself from lawyers mainly? What's the distance? How many kilometers by road?
About 45. By road, it's maybe it's maybe about 50. I'm not sure.
But, it's fair to say with that sort of grade, even in the open pit, you have 1.5-ish. Certainly, extremely economic to ship that to that mill.
Should be, yeah. I mean, especially if you look at it you could look at a higher ground underground scenario, higher grade only underground scenario, or higher grade material from ranch, or there's a lot of options there.
Yeah, I mean, it's point being, fair to say that quite probably KMS will be in production before lawyers gets into the point where you're financing that or whatever standalone. That's probably going to happen before. Sounds to me. So it's an very interesting sort of dynamic there for acceleration, shareholder creation. So I like that a lot. And then can you just comment on the general dynamic in BC? You have Freeport being increasingly extremely active, many joint ventures, many initiatives. You have Boliden sneaking out from Scandinavia first time in a long time and also doing some work there. You have Newmont, Tech, all of these big players. Can you just comment on them and your thinking in relationships with these companies? Are there any angles where there could be cooperation? You make a porphyry discovery, maybe you joint venture it. Who knows? I mean, just comment on your thinking with all of the players.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I talked to a lot of corporates, and whether it's the single asset producers, the mid tiers, the majors, it's always the kind of recurring theme is we're trying to de-risk our portfolios. We like North America as a jurisdiction. We like Canada. BC is a fantastic jurisdiction. And I think you're seeing that reflected now in the number of companies working in BC. And I think that's only going to continue to increase. I mean, with the government now being very bullish on trying to accelerate permitting timelines and, unlocking the potential in our natural resources, that's what they want to hear. And, I think they're going to follow through with that. And, there's a lot of potential here that remains to be unlocked. And for these bigger guys, there's potential for, locking up whole districts and being in production for 20, 30 years. So I think you're going to continue to see a movement from other riskier jurisdictions to North America. BC's great, as I said, and for them, they can manage the permitting risk. One of the questions has always been around, permitting in Canada takes a long time, and historically over the last 10 years, if you look at all the EIAs getting permitted, it's taken about 5 years. I think that's going to come down. We're targeting about 3.5 years. And I think that's very feasible. And from their perspective, they can understand and manage that risk. There's other jurisdictions in the world where the risks are not manageable and just, transpire one day for things that are completely out of their control. So I understand why they want to move to places like Canada.
And when you mentioned the sort of the will finally to expedite permitting in BC and Canada more broadly, when you're describing the permitting timeline in the presentation and so on, sort of submission by 27, Siebel by 28, are you banking on some of these I guess initiatives coming through, or could you see some initiatives that are being talked about and proposed accelerating this timeline even further, and what would it be more precisely for people who are not super sort of close to Canada politics or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, so I'd say that at the moment we haven't really factored in any sort of government assistance to help accelerate this. I think it's more so the approach that we're taking with our First Nations partners to move this forward efficiently. I think there's potential for improvement if and when things transpire with the government. I mean, right now there's a number of companies that they've named that are going through the process that they're looking to accelerate. And as far as I understand it, what they're doing is looking at each project individually and saying, these aspects of the EIA don't necessarily apply to you, so we're going to remove them. And how that translates to months saved, let's say. I'm not quite sure yet, but it will be interesting, very interesting to monitor that over the next 6 months to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good tailwind at least, but most likely it would save you, to my understanding, it would save you time after submission, or would it also be before submission? Just less stuff you need to clarify in that document that you're submitting. Is it both sides of the submission, or mainly after? potentially?
Mainly after. I don't think it's not going to impact us between now and getting going in September. And I think the IPD process, going from IPD through to detailed project description, that's fairly standard and should be quite quick. It's basically everything that comes after that, I would say.
Okay. And then just to sort of wrap up the entire piece here, we always like to ask, and I'll ask you for 2 time frames here. In the 1 year, so this time next year, we're sitting here speaking again, what would you like to have achieved by that point? And then just share with prospective shareholders and existing shareholders the 3-year vision in your own words.
Yeah, so I mean, for this point, 2026, I'd like to, deliver on what I said I'm going to do. And I think, over the last year and a half, I've managed to accomplish that. I don't think that's going to change in the next year where, we're going to get permitting off the ground this year. I think the PFS is going to be really strong. I think, we're going to execute on a very effective summer program this year. Hopefully, we make some new discoveries, we expand that gold system. But all of these things should lead to, hopefully a significant re-rate as well. So, in this time in 2026, I'd very much like to be in that position with a further de-risked project, a better idea of what a permitting timeline is going to look like, and a fantastic PEA at our back, and be working towards FS and detailed engineering. And then the 3-year timeline is really, be pretty close to having the EA completed and FS completed. Construction decision, project financing potentially in place as well. I think that those are all very realistic goals for the next 3 years.
And what do you think the valuation sits at? Maybe you can use like Skina as a reference point to really convey what it can look like in 3 years.
I mean, if that's where we get to, I'd be very pleased with that. Yeah, I mean, they're effectively trading at like kind of 8 to 10 times where we currently are, and as we've kind of ran through, the why invest in Thesis slide that we had in the presentation, fantastic jurisdiction. Most of the infrastructure is already in place. It's logistically a lot simpler to work here. We've got a big resource with lots of upside. The project economics are great. First Nation support on the project, and we've got a strategic involvement as well, and a great shareholder base. So with a kind of shared vision for our strategy of moving this forward. So I think we're very well positioned for growth in the coming years.
Okay, perfect. We thank you for your time, and it's going to be exciting to follow. And we'll probably do some sort of update in, I don't know, half a year or maybe 3 months, something like this, when it makes sense, and check in again and see how things are proceeding.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much for your time, and thanks everybody for paying attention.